Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Krown Countdown U. First of all, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We've got Gord Randall down here or over there, and then we've got Justin Dunk in Toronto. But first, collegiate football in the home and native has rarely seen crowds like this on one weekend. So let's start where there were some butts in some seats in Ottawa for a crosstown rivalry.
Yeah, that's right, Jim. There were some crazy numbers across the country, but you could say it was pandemonium in Ottawa. All these people came out to see a bronzed bear. I bet it was for the beer, though. Picked this up in the first cue. Derek Wendell to Caleb Beaver. Touchdown! GG's. That tied the score at 10. A field goal put Ottawa ahead by 3, but then the Ravens went on blast. The Blackbirds go on a 20-0 run. This TD from Nate Bahar capping that run, his second major of the game. Late fourth cue, Tunde Adeleke does his thing. Coach Olsen told you about him last week. Takes this missed field goal all the way to the house. 120 yards later, that kid is sensational. Carlton, well, they three-peat Pedro, taking the Panda Game by 20. We head west to the new Mosaic, 16,000 plus on hand for the battle for the wheat belt. Oh yeah, brother. Let's begin in the second cue. Saski down by 3. That was until Tyler Chow punched it in from 2 yards out. But then the Pictons, they took over. Noah to cousin Mitchell. Touchdown Regina. Minutes later.
Field except quarterback Noah Picton bobbles the ball, gets control, floats it up into the end zone. Touchdown! This is not a broken record. Mitchell Picton.
2 touchdowns, 2 minutes. Rams take a 6-point lead into the recess. Third cue, a little more magic from Noah.
Sees a window that he can put the ball through. He is fearless, and he's found one there. Connecting with Shinbine. He is off to the races. He's gone. Touchdown, Regina Rams.
Saski made a run in the fourth cue, but came up short. Regina wins a 4th straight, taking the wheat belt in the first game ever played at the new Mosaic.
13 receptions, 189 yards, and a pair of scores. So that's how good does that feel?
Stats are nice, but we got the win, and that's the most important part.
Be honest with me now. Would you or anybody in this locker room coming into the season have envisioned this, being on top of the Canada West at this point of the season?
Well, we tried to create a little theme in our locker room this year. It's believe. So throughout the entire season, we tried to believe that we are one of the best teams in the league, and now we're showing it. It's nice.
Let's head over to Quebec now. The Red Machine facing the Red Men with 11,600 packed into Peps. But this one wasn't pretty. Laval put the boots to McGill, taking this one by 52. Hugo Richard tossing close to 300 yards while playing just over a half of the game. Over to Sherbrooke with close to 7,500 fans in attendance, and the home team fans were loving what they saw early on. Second cue, JC Saint-Hilaire scores this major, putting the green and gold up by 13. To the fourth, Montreal down by 8. Simon Lucier Tremblay hauls in the major, cutting the lead to 2. They go for the 2-point convo. It's good. We got a tie game. Final minute of the game. When in doubt, well, air it out. Regis Sibassou comes down with the leather, and then he goes out. The #1 team in the nation remains unbeaten, getting by Sherby by 7. Atlantic Canada is where we're off to next. Huskies and X-Men in front of over 5,500. And the reigning Loaning Bowl champs took a bite out of the Dogs. It was another day in the office for Tavon Cook. 305 yards, 5 tutties. X takes it by 20. All right, back to Ontario we go. Mac at home to Guelph. Justin Dunk stated on last week's show that the Griffins would take this. No bias there. Well, the former Griffin pivot was wrong. The Marauders scored 16 points in the third quarter alone, en route to a 12-point win. We're jumping all over the country now. To Montreal next. Concordia home to Bishops. Plenty of offense to go around in this one. Both teams combining for close to 900 yards. Trenton Miller tossed 4 TDs, including this 81-yarder to Justin Julian, which was part of a 26-point third quarter. The Stingers improved to 3-2 with a 16-point win. Battle of Alberta in Cowtown, the 50th anniversary for the University of Calgary. And check out those throwback unis I like, and Jimmy, well, he likes this. Jimmy Underdahl airs it out for Dallas both. He goes 62 yards, to the house party. That put the Prehistorics up by 13. They put up 50 on the 50th anniversary, beating the G-Bears by 35. Let's stick in the West. Bison's on the coast to face the T-Birds. You like offense? How about 1,100 yards of it? Late fourth Q, Birds stuck 7 until Ben Cummings ties it up. So overtime we go. 4 overtimes to be correct. This field goal from 38 put the Herd ahead by 3, but the Birds strike back. We told you about this guy last week too. Travell Pinto goes 35 yards for the game-winning touchdown. After the game, Blake Nill was quick to point out that his squad is still a work in progress.
This game was indicative of a team that is trying to find its way. You know, like there were a lot of mistakes, but a lot of big plays. And on this night, we just made more big plays than they did, and we deserve to win that game.
Let's go back to Atlantic Canada. Man, I'm really racking up the air miles here. Huskies and Mounties. This was a defensive battle that MTA came out on top of. This 6-yard scamper from Chris Reed proving to be the winner. Mounties finally win a game. Let's head back to the center of the universe. Western home to the unbeaten Golden Hawks. What was supposed to be a battle for top spot in the conference turned into a one-sided affair. Chris Merchant is really stating his case for heck consideration. The sophomore pivot connected on 73% of his passes, tossing 360 yards, 3 majors. Mustangs with a statement win over the Jayhawks. Southern Ontario is where we'll wrap up the reel. Varsity Blues, Lancers, Windsor up by 7 until this.
Casey Wright going up top, has Cassell Jones. He's at the 10. Can he get in? He does. Cassell Jones, touchdown.
That put the home side up by 14. They take it by 21.
Now it's time for headlines.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
Wow, what a weekend for crowds. 65,000 in the top 5 games combined, with an average of 13,000 over those games. The most significant thing is that all conferences have a game in the top 5, as St. Francis Xavier cleaned up with a well-organized homecoming game. So the question to you, Justin, is how do the institutions ensure that this is sustainable, or is it just a one-off?
Well, I hope it's not just a one-off, Jim, and I think the way the schools need to treat this is make every game like an event and really engage all of the students on campus. It's not just about the football, as much as all of us on this show are football crazy types, but it's the atmosphere around it, bringing everyone together and enhancing the student atmosphere around campus. So what I think they need to do is put these facts and figures in front of students and say, hey, look, this is how much fun you can come when you come out to these games. Make a video reel or photos of what it's like to be at the crowd, you know, what activities there are to do around the games. I know in particular in Guelph, because I've been there so much, they have tailgates surrounding the game. They have after parties and things like that on campus where it really enhances and gives the students an enjoyable Saturday.
Here's the deal. One of the things that make it sustainable is really exploit these rivalries. And rivalries are about identity, aren't they? More than just geography.
Oh, absolutely. And the CIS, I don't think, does a good enough job of doing this across the country. You have a lot of natural geographic rivalries. In fact, I've always used that as a selling point for the Canada West, is that almost every conference game is a natural geographic rivalry of some sort. And you get matchups like York-Toronto, which should be a huge game, highly publicized, promoted. And I know I targeted the Toronto schools last week. I'm not singling them out. But if you look down across the line, one of the things they do great in the States is promoting these rivalries. You have cool nicknames like the Civil War, the Battle of I-95, stuff like that. You can get 2, 3, and 9 teams in the last week of the regular season that are battling it out because it's their national championship. You create that, you get more intensity, more vitriol on the field, and more passion in the stands, and that's how you're going to get bums in seats, Jim.
So, okay, Mac had a great crowd to open things up, working with the Ticats, and there's a great path of CFL cooperation and CIS teams equaling good crowds over the years. The Vanier Cup from a couple of years ago, the 2011, 2012, great example of that, and the Panda Game was an example of that. So why can't everyone just get along and get on the same page to promote football?
Yeah, it's a valid point. There are some hurdles in the way of that. One of the big problems here locally, for example, in Vancouver, is that there are 2 Vancouver area schools not just a CIS school, but also an NC2A school that has equal say with the Lions. Although I would say in this local market, the Lions might benefit from such an arrangement too. One of the other issues too, though, is that the CIS exists in far more markets than the CFL exists. And I think that the CIS is a little hesitant to enter into any kind of a formal partnership on things like this just because of the inequity involved. So there are some kinks to be ironed out, but when you see these successful events happen, if I'm a team like McGill, for example, that plays out of the same stadium as the Montreal Alouettes, I might add, if I'm a team like McGill, I'm trying to partner with that team on at least one home game, possibly multiple home games throughout the season to try and increase the buzz and benefit both clubs.
Okay, so there's lots of good news at the gate, but Justin, I don't care if there was a hailstorm of toads in London. The Laurier Western Showdown drew 1,000, and that is unacceptable. Whoever comes into the AD position at Western after Therese Quigley leaves this spring better have an enterprising aspect to their resume. That crowd is trouble.
It was, Jim, and a lot of the years there at Western, those crowds have not been great, even if they've hosted a Yates Cup or a national semifinal. The reason that I'm always told for that is because students just assume that Western is going to win those games, but it's pretty rare to host a national semifinal, and even though Western seems to play in the Yates Cup all the time, they're not hosting it from year to year. So what I think you need to do, and going back to what we talked about earlier, is get in front of the students. Talk to them about the atmosphere. That stadium is on campus. It's great. They have a great sound system to get them going. They engage the fans during the game. So find a way just to get those fans down there and at the atmosphere once, even if that's just letting them in for free. So maybe they'll continue to keep coming back.
Sidebar is the Canada West playoff race. One good team is going to miss the postseason. That much is guaranteed. The question is who? Each team behind Regina and Calgary have tough schedules ahead. Currently in third, UBC plays 2 in the province of Saskatchewan. The blackout game versus the Huskies will determine a lot. Then it's first place Regina and then at home to Calgary. Manitoba is next as they have the head-to-head tiebreaker with Saskatchewan. Their schedule was front-end loaded with home games, and at 2 and 3, they have some catching up to do. Saskatchewan really needs a win when hosting UBC because trips to McMahon have not been kind to them over the years. So who's the odd man out here, Gord?
Well, for me, Jim, it comes down to that game last weekend out in Point Grey, and it's the University of Manitoba who looks like they're setting up to be the odd man out here. At 2 and 3, with UBC at 3 and 2 ahead of them, they have to hope for UBC to lose out, and they have to win 2 of the 3 remaining games. And the schedule gives them Alberta in Edmonton, which should be a win for this Manitoba team, but it also has them traveling to Calgary and hosting Regina, which are currently the 2 top teams in the conference. So they need to win at least one of those 2 games and hope that UBC loses out. That's a lot of ifs and a lot of hoping for Manitoba. And that tiebreaker versus UBC that they lost in 4 overtimes this past weekend really looms large for the Herd.
For me, it's got to be Saskatchewan. I just look at where they are in terms of positioning in the standings right now, and that schedule they have the rest of the year is not doing them any favors. And I'm going to go on past results, too, that this team is sort of disappointed in recent years. So the Huskies would be my pick to miss out on the Canada West playoffs.
I'm with Justin on this one. I think Saskatchewan will be the odd team out, but you know what? UBC hasn't had a whole lot of success in Saskatchewan over the years, so this one is still up for grabs. The blackout game is going to be huge. Now it's time for Weekend Warriors. Okay, I said a whole lot about Travell Pinto last week as a Weekend Warrior. Let's hear from the man himself.
The winning touchdown, that's something you dream about. Like as a kid, like you dream about being in a game like this, back and forth, like triple overtime, and I'm just happy we came with the W.
Okay, I've said enough about Travell Pinto. I'm going to leave it up to you.
Well, he now has interceptions in back-to-back games, had a crucial pass breakup as a defender. Sounds like a pretty good day for a defensive back. Of course, he also added 10 receptions for 245 yards and 3 touchdowns. Are you kidding me, Jim? Those are video game numbers. And in fact, I don't think I've ever produced those numbers in a video game. And I've been playing for years. Travell Pinto is on another level right now, and he's quickly becoming one of the most impactful Thunderbirds on the defensive side of the ball, as well as on the offensive side of the ball. My question, like I mentioned last week, though, Jim, is this guy going to burn out and hit a wall at some point in time? Because if he goes, that UBC Thunderbirds team is a vastly different looking team right now.
I'll let the Pinto lovin' continue out there on the left coast, boys, and let's bring it east a little bit to Nate Bahar, who does do a heck of a lot for this Carleton Ravens team, although I haven't seen him play defensive back just yet. I bet he would be pretty good, but he had a big-time Panda game, and that seems to be just what he does over the years. He had 12 catches for 138 yards and 2 touchdowns, including a terrific grab in the third quarter that really sort of pushed that lead out of reach for Ottawa. Plus, he's got constant leadership on the sideline. This guy hardly ever sits down on the bench. He's always up encouraging the defense, the kicker, the punter. That guy just oozes charisma, which I think is going to help this Carleton team come playoff time.
The answer to Saskatchewan Trivial Pursuit is Ryan Shinbine, as in, who was the first player to score a touchdown in New Mosaic Stadium? More importantly, Shinbine's 13 receptions for 189 yards and 2 TDs showed the conference and the nation that, like the 3 previous Hardy Cup champs, this team is loaded across the board with weapons.
Well, Jim, my second weekend warrior, actually my second and third weekend warriors of the weekend, are the 2 defensive ends from Carleton, Kenechukwu Onyeka, that was an easy one, and James Senarini. These guys, as well as the entire defensive line unit for Carleton, dominated that game in the afternoon on Saturday afternoon. And if you didn't watch that game live, the stat sheet doesn't really do justice to how impactful these 2 were on the game. Derek Wendell was under pressure all afternoon. The 2 men that I mentioned combined for 18 tackles and a sack and a half. He was sacked 4 times total, but he was under pressure numerous other times. Never got settled for a guy who's been one of the most prolific passers in the country this year. And they, relatively speaking, completely shut him down. A monster game for that Carleton front.
Now we go all the way to the East Coast, guys, and Paulo Locke Edwards, a defensive back from St. Francis Xavier, had a big-time game in their homecoming. 4.5 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, 1 fumble recovery, 1 tackle for loss, 1 interception. Did you get all that? Good, because he had a massive day and a 37-17 win against St. Mary's, the 5th-year Hamilton, Ontario native and Laurier transfer, doing big things for the X-Men.
Let's go back to the title holder of the Wheat Belt, the Regina Rams, and Danny Nesbitt, who picked off Kyle Siemens in the first quarter and again late in the fourth to help put away the team's 4th victory of the season. Nesbitt was also credited with a pass breakup, a solo tackle, and 3 assisted tackles in the win. Most of all, Nesbitt represents the newfound enthusiasm the Rams are playing with since the arrival of head coach Stephen Bryce. When we come back, it's Coach Olson and a look at the top prospects in the nation.
Krown Countdown U is supported by the Guelph Griffins, the defending Yates Cup champions.
West Shore Rebels, Kamloops Broncos. Rebels took down the Broncos 34-25. Running back Jamel Lyles broke former BI Raider Andrew Harris's BCFC single-season rushing record with 1,604 yards this season. The playoff matchups are set. The Rebels will host Cross-Island rival the VI Raiders. And the Langley Rams will take a trip to Kelowna to play the Okanagan Sun in a rematch of last year's Cullen Cup final. Football day in Saskatchewan. After the Wheat Belt, it's the Hilltops and the Thunder in the old building. Josh Uwanachuk punches it in late to give the Toppers the lead. Hilltops score 1 for the Toon in a 4-point win. So it's the Calgary Colts and the Hilltops leading the way in the PFC. And here are your CEGEP Division I standings. Lee, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Lee, let's talk about the CFC 100, and let's focus on the top 10. 9 players have already committed, and they have all committed stateside to schools in the United States. So Is this part of a trend? Is this a blip? Do you see this as something that's a little more permanent in terms of kids focusing their attention stateside?
As far as the NCAA and committing that early, that's a trend that's here to stay. In the past half a decade, kids have been committing to the NCAA. For instance, this year, Americans, the top 100 American players, 33 of them have committed by May. So that trend is here to stay. It's because of things like camps, things like combines, things like the huddle film that the recruiters just, they know the players earlier. They get them to commit earlier. So the trend is there to stay as far as committing that early to the NCAA. When it comes to the Canadian angle is, I think this is more of a cycle. This is a great class. It reminds me of the class a few years ago with the Tavon Smiths, the Keel Lynches, that class about 4 or 5 years ago. So this is a deep class in Canada. So I think coupled with the fact that kids in the NCAA commit earlier, and it's a deep class in Canada, that's why you're seeing 9 of the top 10 CFC 100 kids already committed.
Is there anything additional that CIS schools can do? I know there's been a lot of discussion about possibly expanding financial awards, but if you talk to a number of coaches in the CIS, they say that may not make all that much of a difference. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be those top kids that are going to go to the NCAA. I think if we look at other sports, I don't think anyone's going to question whether Andrew Wiggins should have went to Kansas or Jamal Murray should have went to Kentucky or Andre DeGrasse and Aaron Brown, the sprinters, go to USC. So I don't think you're ever going to compete in the top programs, whether it's a Michigan or Penn State or Oklahoma State, Virginia, some of the kids, places that kids have committed to this year. So I don't think that's ever going to be an area where you can compete. I think it's maybe more the kids that are on the fence, whether they're going to get maybe an FCS offer or Division II offer, where I think, Canadian schools are already competing. So I think, yeah, can they do more and should they do more? And hopefully they can do more for Canadian athletes. That'd be great. But I don't think you'll ever be able to compete with, the Michigans where there's over 100,000 people at your home game.
Lee, thanks very much for doing this. Appreciate your time.
This week, we're going to take a look at the University of Saskatchewan rushing attack, highlighted by Tyler Chow. Dynamic rusher, one of the best in the country, big offensive line, and a varied and creative scheme to highlight his ability. Let's take a look at this first play. Double tight scheme. We've got 2 tight ends. I love this stuff. We've got an offensive lineman over here and then a bigger type of back over here. This creates some issues for the defense. They're in a 30 front. You're going to see a simple counter tray. Love this play. Power rushing attack, downhill gap scheme. Let's roll this. You got a down block here on the front side. This block is absolutely key. Let's pause it right there. We got this down right here. We're going to chip off to this level. You see the polar 1 and polar 2 coming around the edge. Turns into a sweep and Chow's into open space. Let's roll the clip. Here we go. That's 2 big bodies coming into space off the edge. Now Chow's in open space. You can see the dynamic action with his feet and his body. He gains yards after contact all the time. This next clip is going to look very similar, but it's a different play. Power here. Let's take a look. Similar front. We've got a tight end over to this side. We're going to double team and chip to the next level. We've got a down block. We've got a down and a double team to the MAC. We're going to pull this guy off the edge, and Chow's going to end up in the same space with a similar result. You're going to see these downs. They're key in this scheme. Up to the next level and into space with that polar. Big people moving fast as an offensive scheme is always difficult for a defensive front. This next clip is just going to be simple, old school smash mouth football. No tight ends, no scheme. Just let's get downhill and beat somebody up. Let's take a look here. You got simple tight zone. One of my favorite plays. Off into space. Double team or a deuce block up to there to the next level, and we're going to have a cutoff block. Simple, downhill. Watch the patience that Chow shows. Let's roll this clip. Right here, that double team's key, tucks behind it, off into space, breaks a tackle, spins, finishes the run. That's what has made a difference for the Huskies this year. They've been running the ball consistently versus everyone they play. If they can continue to do that, they'll find themselves in the playoffs this year, and who knows where the end will lie.
So it's Triple W 2K, or what we want to know, and the number one Triple W 2K is what's the best rivalry game every year? And I think I know where you're going, Justin.
I'm sorry, guys. It's obvious, but I have to go with the Panda Game. I was there in Ottawa, and yes, I was an OUA guy, but just feeling the atmosphere around that game and the setup, too, at TD Place was pretty cool. They had Carleton fans all on one side, Ottawa fans all on the other side, you know, chanting school pride, getting after the other team a little bit. And no matter their records, that game is big time in that city, and that's why, for me, it right now is the best rivalry game in CIS football.
Funny, I thought you'd go with Guelph Western there, Justin. One of the biggest rivalry games, like he said, has to be the Panda Game, and one of the big things with that is they promote the heck out of that game off the field as well, and it also provides a legitimate neutral site for them to play at. But for me, the one that sells itself on the field that needs no promotion right now is Laval and Montreal. You're talking two of the premier teams in the country. They're fighting for the same demographic. They have that francophone element going on. It's kind of the fight for the francophone audience. And you have teams that draw well anyway. They're different parts of the province between that natural Quebec City-Montreal rivalry. There's lots of elements, even the red and blue element to it. I mean, it just lends itself perfectly to a Hatfields and McCoy's type rivalry, Jim. And this one, for my money, has to be the best in the nation and has been for a couple years now.
So we've got this one weekend right now coming up that's a donut hole. Could every conference play a game on this Thanksgiving weekend, or is it viable?
I don't know that it is viable, Jim, and I know it's frustrating for us as analysts looking forward to this week and only having a third of the normal slate, but I know from my experience in the OUA, whenever you played a Thanksgiving weekend game, a lot of those schools are commuter schools. A lot of those schools are drawing people from the Toronto area. By the time you hit Sunday afternoon or even Monday in some cases, those students are all gone. So those games never draw. And that's, as with attendance being a huge issue in the CIS at the best of times, you don't want to put home dates on a day where you're never going to draw. In fact, I'm actually kind of surprised the OUA still schedules any games at all on this weekend. I guess they have to get them all in. But between that, the fact that you have some roster size issues, attrition issues, players like having that bye and having that time to rest not just their bodies but their minds. I think I'm okay with it being the way it is. And another factor to consider in this country is there's an urgency to finish the season when it finishes. So when you're talking about adding more games, extending the regular season time is also not an option in my opinion. So as much as we'd love to see more football every year, I'm not quite sure that it works, Jim.
Well, it could be if the schedule is set up the same way. I really like the synergy with the way the bowl games work and the Vanier Cup in terms of timing it up with the Grey Cup, and if they're ever paired together again, that would be nice, but that's a whole other conversation. So if you look back a few years ago when the RSEQ used to play 9 games, it is possible, and especially now with the OUA starting early, if you kind of had that mentality and wanted to play an extra game, possibly 9 across the country, it certainly could be done. Now, do I think it should happen? I'm not so sure, just because there's a bit of a war of attrition that takes place because there's so much of the smaller rosters that are in the CIS, especially compared to the NCAA.
Well, that does it for another edition of Krown Countdown U. You can get in touch with us at any of these various social media locations. But for now, let's get out to the game.